Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's explainer. Today, we're exploring this really fascinating intersection between gritty, on-the-ground urban history and, well, high-minded sociological theory. We're heading to Vienna, Austria. But we aren't looking at the imperial palaces or those famous classical concert halls. Nope. Instead, we're uncovering the city's alternative ecosystem. We're going to look at how the literal, physical act of taking over a space can actually redefine what a city is, who it belongs to, and how those actions back in the 1970s laid the groundwork for a massive, thriving underground culture that is absolutely still kicking today. Here's our roadmap for the explainer today. 1. The slaughterhouse utopia. 2. Claiming the public space. 3. Voices of the underground. And 4. Vienna's independent art spaces. First step, Section 1. The slaughterhouse utopia. Vienna, 1976. Let's set our historical anchor. To really understand Vienna's alternative scene, we've got to travel back to 1975 and visit a pretty unexpected location, a completely derelict former slaughterhouse in the Landstrada district. Our timeline actually starts when the director of the Vienna Festival decided to use this huge abandoned campus for performances of Jérôme Savari's Grand Magic Circus. Now, it was only meant to be temporary, right? But in June 1976, when a musical ended its run, something incredible happened. The audience was encouraged to just stay. And, well, they did. They completely squatted the buildings. Throughout that entire summer of '76, this vibrant, autonomous utopia just sort of formed out of nowhere. Thousands of people flocked there. But by October, thanks to some internal squabbles and intense pressure from the city council, the space was relinquished. A couple of days later, the buildings were largely demolished. But let's look a little closer at that wild summer. When the occupation first kicked off, 700 activists, calling themselves the Aeronaute, unveiled this massive banner declaring, "Hier bleiben is Solidarität. Staying here is solidarity." And they didn't just sit around, They completely transformed that slaughterhouse. It actually grew to be about the same size as Freetown Christiania in Copenhagen. The squatters organized cafes, a cinema, a women's house, a kids' house, a literal university, and even a theater. They even founded a city newspaper called the Falter, which, amazingly enough, still exists in Vienna today. Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer scale of mainstream validation this squatted abattoir ended up getting. I mean, Leonard Cohen, yes, that Leonard Cohen, after performing there, famously called it the best place to be in Vienna. And he definitely wasn't alone in thinking that. One single summer party drew 8,000 people. All the concerts, the readings, the exhibitions, they were entirely free. And surprisingly, the mainstream media covered the whole experiment really favorably. It was just this massive collective success. So the 1976 arena occupation was a massive flashpoint, a direct product of the autonomous movement that really shook the foundations of how space was used in the city. But it leaves us with a deeper, much more abstract question. What actually happens, like on a political and societal level, when bodies physically reclaim space? Section 2. Claiming the public space. Bodies in alliance. We're going to look at a fascinating sociological translation of these types of squatting movements. We'll be drawing on the analysis of authors Katharina Fritsch and Nicholas Schlitz, who examined Viennese squats through the lenses of radical democracy and biopolitics. To really grasp the power of squatting, Fritsch and Schlitz argue we first have to understand the historical divide between the public and private spheres. They trace this all the way back to the bourgeois state that popped up around the 1789 French Revolution. During this era, a highly gendered and classed binary was constructed. The public sphere became associated with men, rationality, and productive action. Meanwhile, women were biologically categorized as tied to nature and pushed into the private sphere, which became the domain of reproduction and basic life support. Basically, it created this rigid boundary that dictated exactly who belonged where. So how exactly do squats challenge this? Well, enter the theories of philosopher Jacques Rancière. Rancière contrasts what he calls the logics of police, which is essentially the governmental drive to confine and close and privatize public spaces, against the logic of politics. And the logic of politics? That's the democratic government of anyone and everyone. So when activists squat a space like the arena, they are directly, forcefully colliding with that order-maintaining police logic. They are struggling to physically enlarge the public sphere. So the crucial point is how this ties back into the actual bodies occupying that space. Fritsch and Schlitz draw heavily on Judith Butler's arguments right here. When people gather in a public square, they aren't just standing around making speeches. They're actively bringing the private sphere into the public. By organizing food, shelter, and protection from violence, the basic supportive needs that were historically banished to the private realm, right out in the open, they're committing a profoundly political act. As Butler notes, the mere persistence of these bodies in public space literally is the exercise of politics itself. Moving right along to Section 3, Voices of the Underground, Cultural Architects. Okay, so we've talked about the physical grit of the 70s and the high-minded sociology of public space. But how do these alternative cultures actually sustain themselves? How do they reach the broader public? Well, they need cultural architects. And one of the most important figures in sustaining and broadcasting this exact type of culture in Austria is Fritz Ostermeier. Born in 1956, Ostermeier has spent decades as an author, radio presenter, DJ, musician, and cultural journalist. He serves as a vital, active bridge between the underground and the broader public consciousness. Ostermeier's resume is incredibly diverse, which perfectly reflects the eclectic energy of the alternative scene itself. He's probably best known for his long-standing work with the Austrian public broadcaster ORF, specifically co-hosting the award-winning cultural and music program Im Sumpf on the FM4 radio station. But his influence definitely doesn't stop there. He served as the artistic director of the Vienna School of Poetry for over a decade. He's a prolific musician and composer. He even won the 2022 Rami Award for Best Music for the film Rimini alongside Herwig Zamenhof. In fact, the city of Vienna recently credited him with helping to shape Austrian alternative culture, largely because he used his massive platform to champion underground acts, like the art technology group Monochrom, way before they ever found mainstream success. Finally, Section 4, Vienna's Independent Art Spaces, the Network Today. We've seen how a single summer in 1976 sparked a massive idea, how theorists explain the true power of claiming space, and how figures like Fritz Ostermeier kept that alternative spirit alive. But what is the tangible reality of all this in Vienna right now? Well, the answer lies in the Independent Space Index. This is the modern-day manifestation of literally everything we've been talking about. The physical arena might have been demolished back in October 1976, but the energy of the Arnauten, it simply evolved. Today, Vienna is home to a sprawling, highly organized network of autonomous and alternative cultural locations. And this brilliantly illustrates the decentralized, almost overwhelming scale of the modern independent scene. Just look at a tiny fraction of this list. You have spaces like Ada operating out of the 16th district, Fox in the 3rd, the Kulturdrogerie in the 18th, and Super in the 5th. You even have projects like Basement that list their district as nomadic, meaning they fluidly move and claim space wherever they can. It perfectly echoes those sociological theories of resisting governmental enclosure that we just talked about. In total, the Independent Space Index lists over 70 of these autonomous spaces. And they aren't just confined to the outskirts either. They range from the very center of the city in the 1st district all the way out to the 22nd. This vast ecosystem of fixed locations and nomadic pop-ups proves that the drive to claim public space and create supportive alternative communities is absolutely just as vital in Vienna today as it was half a century ago. We've journeyed all the way from an abandoned slaughterhouse to the forefront of radical democratic theory, and finally to a citywide network of over 70 thriving art spaces. The underlying thread here is clear. Space is never just neutral ground. It is actively shaped by the people who choose to show up, persist, and support one another. So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a thought to carry into your own life. If the simple act of gathering can completely redefine the nature of a city, whose space are you occupying today, and how might you transform it tomorrow? Thanks so much for learning with me, and I'll see you in the next one.